Once upon a time, in a land far, far away, a young knight came into the area that was his keeping. Now, this man was barely more than a squire. This was his first assignment, wasn't quite sure what he was doing, but he tried his best. One day he saw an old widow carrying a load of bricks from the brickyard. Her chimney had fallen down and needed to be rebuilt, and so every day for the next 10 days, he would meet this widow at the brickyard and carry her bricks for her until her chimney was rebuilt and her house was livable again. Another time, the bridge over the river by the town washed away, and the town elders gathered and tried to figure out how many trees are we going to have to take down, and how much lumber will we need, and what should the design of the bridge be to withstand the floods that come every so often. The young knight sat down and did all the calculations and all the geometry and all the other things, and engineered a bridge that could withstand even the mightiest flood. Another time, he was just walking through the village and he saw the children playing in the village green. He noticed one child sitting off by himself. Now, this child did not have the use of his legs. So the knight said to the young child, "I'll be your legs." And putting him up on his shoulders, he ran around the field, and the young boy felt the wind rushing through his hair and felt like he was on the wings of an eagle. So the night was pretty good. But then one day he received word that the king had to go away. Apparently, there was some diplomatic meeting of all the kings in the region, and so the king said, "I need somebody to watch over my kingdom while I'm gone. I don't know how long I'll be away, so I need someone who has all of the qualities that a king needs." And so he summoned all of his knights from the 4 regions of his kingdom to gather together for a great competition. Now, the knight from the east side of the realm, he was rumored to be the fastest, so fast that he could outrun even his own horse. I think he just had a really slow horse, but that was the rumor anyway, that this man could not be matched for speed. But our young knight over in the western village decided that he was going to try anyway. And so he spent the next week chasing after his horse, and one time he almost got a touch of the tail, but he could never quite catch it. And he would leave the field sweaty, exhausted, and depressed. And he turned to his father, who lived in that village, and said, "I don't think I can do this." But his father said, "Victory does not always go to the swiftest. Trust in the Lord to show you your path, and you will succeed." Now, the knight from the southern area was rumored to be the strongest, so strong that he could lift a horse under each arm. How you fit a horse under each arm, I haven't quite figured out yet, but so the story goes. He was big, he was strong. Well, our young knight didn't have a lot of horses in his particular village, but he did have a lot of dogs. Have any of you tried to lift your dog? Okay, maybe that's a good workout for him. And the boy did get stronger. I mean, he had a dog under each arm. one draped across his shoulders and one little chihuahua sitting right on the top of his head. So he could lift 4 dogs, and he thought he was doing pretty good. But he knew it was not 2 horses worth of weight. But his father said, victory does not always go to the strong. Trust in the Lord to give you the strength you need. Now, the knight from the northern part of the kingdom, he was rumored to be very, very wise. So wise that the teachers of the entire kingdom would come to him with their questions. There was no riddle he couldn't work out, no puzzle he couldn't solve. And so the boy set himself to figuring out every puzzle he could get his hands on, talking to the teachers of the village and the village wise folk, and gaining as much knowledge as he could. But he still didn't think it was enough. And his father said, do not be vexed, for the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. Without that, nothing else really matters. Well, the day of the great competition, the tournament, arrived, and all of the knights assembled at the castle, and the king said to them, I will be going away to conduct some diplomatic issues, and so I need to leave one of you 4 in charge of my kingdom. To determine who it will be, we'll have a contest of speed, of strength, and of intelligence. And so the first part of that was the competition for speed. The king led them to the edge of the great wood that bordered the kingdom and said, there is a path laid out through the woods. There are obstacles along the way that you will have to overcome, but stay on the path, and the first one to emerge on the other side of the wood will be declared the winner. Well, they all set off at a breakneck speed, and they came to the first obstacle, a great pit right in the middle of the pathway. Our young knight looked at it and thought, how am I going to cross this? How can I get around it? The knight from the east kingdom, the east part of the kingdom, rumored to be the quickest, said, I know a shortcut around all this. We take the shortcut, we can get past all the obstacles and out of these woods quickly. So he and the knight from the north and the knight from the south all took off down this side path. But our young knight worked out all the obstacles he came across and eventually emerged from the woods hours after the other 3. He thought, well, this is off to a terrible start. Maybe I'll do better with the next competition. The next competition was about strength. And the king brought them to a pile of logs. And he said, you can pick the biggest log you can carry from this pile and carry it all the way up the hill, up to the castle. And whoever brings me the biggest log will be declared the winner. And the king went back to the castle to wait for his knights to bring the logs up. And the knight from the south, the strong man, looked at the logs and spotted another pile off to the side. A pile of logs that were well rotted out, nice and hollow. Maybe they had a woodchuck or something living in them. She said, why don't we take from this pile? We can take a much bigger log because they're hollow and light. So he and the knight from the east and the knight from the north all took those hollow logs up to the castle. Our knight from the western side of the kingdom found a rather small log. Not terribly big, but it was the most he could carry. But his was solid. So he brought it up and laid it before the king. And the king looked at these huge logs the others brought in and this little stumpy log and just shook his head and said, okay, our final competition is one of intelligence. Who is the smartest among you? I have hidden 4 treasure boxes in the kingdom, and here is a list of all the puzzles and riddles that you need to solve in order to find your treasure box. So once you have found it, bring it to me and lay it here before the throne. Well, they worked out the first few. They were pretty easy. The first riddle was one that, you probably all know. What goes on 4 legs in the morning, 2 legs in the afternoon, and 3 legs in the evening? Man, human being. That's the riddle of the Sphinx, one of the classics. So they started out pretty easy, but they got tougher and tougher. And eventually, the knight from the north, the brainiac in the group, said, hey, I know who wrote these. Let's go pay him for the answers, and we can find our treasure quickly. So that's what they did, but our knight from the western kingdom sat himself down on a rock and worked out all the puzzles one by one until finally he had gone through the whole sheet, found his treasure box, and set it before the king. Now that the competition was over, the king rose and said, now I have to decide which of you 4 is going to rule the kingdom while I'm away. He turned to the knight from the east, the speedy knight, and said, because you departed from the course, you cannot rule in my stead. A king has to follow the course laid out for him. Do not deviate to the right nor to the left. He turned to the knight from the south, the strong man, and he looked at the logs and he said, all of these logs that you brought back look impressive, but I can't make lumber out of them. They're too rotted to burn. They are useless logs. That's why they were in a pile to themselves. You certainly cannot rule in my stead, for a king must decide what is best, not what is easiest. He looked over the sheets that the knights worked their puzzles and riddles out on, and he noticed how hastily written 3 of the knights were. The king also employed the man who wrote the pages, so he knew who knew the answers, and said, you cheated. You paid for the answers. A king must use his treasures wisely and well, not for such vanity as being declared the smartest. You certainly cannot rule. Finally, he turned to the young knight from the west. And he said, because you kept to the path, because you worked with all your strength and you used your own mind, not someone else's, to solve the riddles, you will be king in my place for as long as I am away. The young man was shocked. He thought he had lost. And yet, during the time of the king's absence, the kingdom prospered under his leadership. So much so that when the king returned and said, "The negotiations did not go well for my daughter. I couldn't find her a suitable husband in the other kingdoms. How about you, my young knight? Would you take my daughter and rule after me?" Young man was overwhelmed. But the two married and went on to, how does it usually end? They lived happily ever after. And when we look at Christ the King, we get a very similar presentation. Jesus is our king, yes indeed, but he didn't seem like much of a king. I mean, kings have armies to back them up. Who did Jesus have following him? A few fishermen, a tax collector, a zealot, an assassin. This was the king's retinue? Doesn't look like much of a king. Or if we look at him on the cross, wouldn't a king have fought back? Wouldn't he have summoned those 6 legions of angels from heaven to defend him? Perhaps it took more strength, physical, spiritual, and emotional, to stay on that cross and pay for the sins of the world than it would have taken to fight back. A king should be wise and be able to pass on that wisdom. And certainly, we look at Jesus' teachings every week in our gospel lesson. How many of those teachings are easy to understand? I mean, granted, the parables try to get us pretty close, but do you have a really clear idea of what heaven is going to be like, or what the world was like before the fall into sin? There are some things that our minds just cannot grasp, no matter how great the teacher. And so as we focus on Christ the King this week and look at our King, he may not match the world's view of a king, but he is wise, he is just, he is strong, he is fearless, and he gives to you and I his very kingdom to reign with him forever. So as we grasp that, may the peace of God, which passes our understanding, keep your hearts and minds in Christ Jesus till we come to life everlasting. Amen.